We're going to continue tonight with Nehemiah, and we'll start with the second chapter. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, tonight we are again thankful that we can come together to open your word to see what you have for us. And Lord, you've never failed to have something that reaches into the heart and touches us with something right off of your altar. And I pray for that tonight. I pray your anointing will be on your word as it goes out. Anoint my lips to say those things you'd have me to say, and then anoint our hearts to receive. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right, so last week we had some background on Nehemiah, and we looked at Nehemiah's prayer. And so now we're going to see Nehemiah putting his prayer into action. So Nehemiah, second chapter, beginning with verse 1. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, Why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart. So he became dreadfully afraid, and said to the king, May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire? So in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, Nehemiah was doing his normal duties. Now, the month of Nisan is the first month of spring and the first month of the ecclesiastical year for the Hebrews. So it corresponds to our month of March or April. As you may know, in March. That's just the way the two works out. That's why Hanukkah sometimes falls right about Christmas, and other times falls maybe in November. It's because the two calendars aren't synced together. So this was known as the month of the barley ripening, and comes from the Sumerian words meaning first fruits. So it was in the first fruits, the month of first fruits, that he went in before the king. Now, last week we found that, he had gone into he had heard from his brethren, but that was 4 months before he went into the king. So for 4 months, Nehemiah, even though he knew the condition in Jerusalem, he had been fasting, he had been in mourning. Now this is 4 months later. So for 4 months, he had mourned. And obviously he didn't fast all of that time. I mean, he was still able to walk, so that was probably not the case. But they did fast certain things, and he was in this completely sad condition for 4 months. Now there's a lot of conjecture on why it was 4 months. There was a possibility that Artaxerxes had left Shushan and gone into Babylon for the winter months, because that was something they did often. They would go into Babylon because it was a warmer place. You remember Shushan is up in the hills, and Babylon was down in the plains, so it would have been a warmer climate in the winter. So perhaps that was the case, and Nehemiah may not have gone with him. And the thing that I should have pointed out last week was that Nehemiah was one of many cupbearers, or at least several cupbearers. It was like servants. They didn't all work everything that happened, because every meal the king would have wine. That was their drink, so there had to be a cupbearer there for every meal. This would not work well to have one guy doing this all the time. So there were others, and so maybe he had not made the trip, or there could have been many other reasons why this 4 months passed by. Now Artaxerxes ascended to the throne in 465 BC, though this would be 445 BC. So we know this was in the 20th year of the reign of King Artaxerxes. So from that, we know he came on the throne in 465, so we know the time now that Nehemiah was going to go to Jerusalem. That would have been 445, 446, again, depending on the calendar, BC. Now, because of his mourning over the fate of the people in the city of Jerusalem, Nehemiah was sad in the presence of the king. This was not something that you wanted to do. Being sad in the presence of the king could get you into a lot of problems. And I found this from Barnes in his notes. He's quoting Xenophon, who was an early historian, and he's talking about the job of the cupbearer. And I thought this was really interesting. He remarked about the polished and graceful manner in which the cupbearers of the Median and consequently the Persian monarchs performed their duty of presenting the wine to their royal master. Having washed the cup in the king's presence and poured into their left hand a little of the wine, which they drank in his presence, they then handed the cup to him, not grasped, but lightly held in the tips of their thumb and forefingers. This description has received some curious illustrations from the monuments of Assyria and Persia, on which the cupbearers are frequently represented in the act of handing wine to the king. So in other words, it wasn't just a matter of tasting the wine, here you go. Everything was very polished. Everything was very graceful. You know, they would take the cup, pour a little wine, drink it in front of the king, then carefully on their fingertips hand the cup to the king. So it was almost a ceremony. And so it was while he was in the process of doing this that the king noticed that Nehemiah was sad. And he knew that he was not sick. So what was the problem? Well, the problem was that there was something that was sorrowing, or was something wrong with his heart. Nehemiah was disturbed about something. And I think this is interesting about this King Artaxerxes. While history treats Artaxerxes Longimanus, and that was his full name, Artaxerxes Longimanus is his full name. History treats him as a weak king because of the way he was, he conquered land, and the way he treated the people. He was considered weak. But he was very kind-hearted. And I find it's interesting that in a time when kings didn't last very long on the throne, he lasted for over 40 years on the throne. And, well, we know that because here we are in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, and he was there 20 years later when Nehemiah has some more things to talk about. So we know it was at least 40 years that Artaxerxes Longimanus was on the throne. And a good reason for that was his kind-heartedness. Now, most kings would have seen a sad servant and immediately called for the guards to come and haul him out. because you did not show sadness in front of the king in the Persian Empire. Now, we kind of also know this from the book of Esther. You remember that Esther told her uncle about what Haman had said, and Esther 4:2 tells us that Haman could not go, or that Mordecai, rather, could not go in before the king and perform his normal duties because he was in sackcloth. He was in mourning. And it says it was not permitted. So if you were in mourning, if you were sad, you were not allowed to go in front of the king. I mean, you had to be happy and upbeat all the time. It was Disneyland, boy, right there. You had to be woo-woo, whether you felt like it or not. And on this particular occasion, now, I'm sure that Nehemiah had performed his duties probably other times, unless the king was out of town. He had performed his duties probably many times, but he'd always managed to put on the happy face. You know, he took the Disneyland training, he was able to put on the happy face and walk out there and do it. But for some reason, this time, he couldn't do it. And so he showed a sad face. And when the king brought it to his attention and asked him, what's wrong? Notice what the reaction of Nehemiah was. He became afraid. You see, the king could have fired him, taken him out of his position. He could have thrown him in prison. He even could have had him killed because he was violating the law by being sad in front of the king. Now, you know, I mean, we kind of laugh at that, but you know, this kind of shows us what the temperament of these early kings were. And this was not just in Persian kings, even other kings. In fact, it looked like Saul maybe had some of that too. You know, you just had to be happy in front of the king. And in business, it's not a whole lot different. You know, if you make a presentation to a CEO or an owner of a company, we used to laugh all the time putting these things together. It's always a matter of very few words and a lot of pictures. And the more color on the pictures, the better. I mean, you wanted pictures. Don't put any information up there. So you could always paint a rosy picture. You know, we're losing money, man. It's going out like crazy. But here's the good news. There's always the good news. We're going to have a whole new set of workers at some point. Yeah, whatever. And so that idea has really continued over till today. Our rulers, very few of them really want to hear bad news. All they want to know is how well they're doing. And we see that today. You know, I think some of our rulers here in the United States are so delusioned because all they hear is good news. They never hear the bad news. So, at least very little of it.
Yeah.
All right. So, here's Nehemiah now coming in before the king. And the king now is going to have to make a decision. And it's kind of interesting, I think, that Nehemiah, when he explains what his sorrow is about, notice what he says. May the king live forever. Now that was a complimentary phrase, and it was something they used quite often. Why should thy face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste and its gates are burned with fire? This tells us, number one, that Nehemiah's family came from Jerusalem. Now, I mentioned last week, I doubt seriously that Nehemiah had ever been to Jerusalem, and if he had, probably as an infant, a very small child. Because at this point, he had been in captivity for 70 years. So, it seems more likely that Nehemiah was born in Babylon, or at least came as a child. Because at 70 years old, supposing he had been 1 year old, I know how hard it would be to be that graceful and serve the wine, holding the cup in my fingertips and all of that stuff. To be so graceful, I'd fall on the ground in the process. Right? So more than likely he was a young man, or at least at this point middle-aged, but he had come up in Babylon. So that's the first thing we can kind of look at. But notice his explanation. He didn't say the walls of the city are torn down. The people are all in disarray. My beautiful city is torn down. He says that it's laid waste, but it's the tombs of my fathers. And that was a very, very interesting thing to say, and I think it shows Nehemiah's wisdom, because if there was one thing that the Persians were very, very concerned about and held in very high regard, and that was the tombs of their ancestors. And any danger, any hint that there was violence against one of their tombs, it was just horrible to them. I mean, it just brought horror to them that their ancestors were going to be mistreated or, some way. And we know this is similar to Egypt. Egypt had this same mentality when Joseph was there. So this was not unusual in these times. But Nehemiah played to that. It was his ancestral tomb that was bothering him. When in reality, from the prayer that he prayed, we read last week, the issue were the people in the city. He never mentions his tombs until he comes here. So this tells us, I think, something when we're dealing with non-Christians, people out in the world. We have to find what it is they're interested in. It doesn't do a bit of good to walk out there and start quoting a bunch of scripture to somebody who doesn't care anything about scripture. They're more interested in something else. So, if they're out there with a speedboat and they've been racing boats, don't go up to them and start talking about how to build a house. Find something about racing boats and get their interest, because that will pique their interest. They'll be interested to talk to you. I know very little about motorcycles, except how to ride them. I can ride a motorcycle. I've been riding them for so many years. It's second nature. I can ride motorcycles. And I know enough about it to be able to carry on a decent conversation. But there are guys in our chapter who can tell you every inch of a motorcycle engine. They're all different kinds. They can talk about some little part that's way down in there that I've never even heard of, and they'll talk about, well, if you change that and put this one in there, you're going to gain 200 horsepower or whatever it is. I mean, they have all kinds of things. So when they're out there talking to other people who ride motorcycles, they're into this, and before long it's well, can I pray with you? We see here from Nehemiah, while he was not trying to lead the king to anything other than being agreeable to allow him to go do the work of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. He wanted to move him to make a decision. So, and this is just a general rule. If you want to move somebody to make a decision, you have to talk about something they're interested in, or you're never going to move them. All right, so let's read on. Verse 4. Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. So picture this, the king's sitting there, and he says, okay, Nehemiah, what do you want? And Nehemiah turns away from the king, falls on his face, and starts praying to God. No, that didn't happen. That would be an affront to the king. But what we do see here is what is maybe, and I don't know, I haven't researched this one, but it may be the first instance in the Bible where we actually see silent prayer. It's something that we do, isn't it? When something comes up, we say, God help us. Or in our minds, we say, God, I need you right now. This was Nehemiah. Now, what does that tell me about Nehemiah? It tells me he had a relationship with God. Now, the same relationship we have, no. But he had that kind of a relationship that he didn't have to stop and say, can I get back with you on that? I need to go talk to a priest. I need to go see the high priest with the Urim and Thummim and see if he can give me some help here. No. He didn't have to go to any of that kind of thing, which was very unusual in the Old Testament. Very few men had this kind of a relationship that they could just stop and say, I need your help right now. How am I going to answer this? You say, how do I know that? Why else would he pray? He was not being threatened. He was just being asked, what do you want? Okay, God, help me get this across, what I want. Now from Nehemiah's answers about why he was sad, the king understood that there was something he wanted. So Nehemiah already had a plan in mind. He had 4 months to put together a plan of what he wanted to do. I want to stop right here and point this out. Nehemiah was a servant, probably started off at the bottom of the rung as a slave in the palace, or maybe not even in the palace, but he had worked himself up to being cupbearer. He was still just a servant. His skill set involved being graceful, tasting wine, being happy, giving the king the cup, He was as far as being qualified to lead people in building the wall. He did not have that skill set. Now, as you know, I'm writing a book. Well, when I look at Gideon, I see exactly the same thing. The only thing Gideon was really skilled at was taking a stick and pounding on some grain and blowing it in the air as he was hiding from the Mennonites. An army against 135,000 of the enemy. No, he was not qualified to do that. He had no training. And yet, not only did he do it, but he spent 4 months planning it. This was not an accident. He didn't just fall in the hole, and all of a sudden, oh, I'm in this hole, I guess I better get busy. No. He saw a need, he sought God for what to do, and he prepared to meet the need, even though he was not prepared as far as skill sets. Now my question, that I ask is simply, what took them so long to build the walls? Why hadn't somebody already started rebuilding the walls? We're going to find out tonight there were people that knew how to build walls. These were wall builders. So why didn't they do it?
They didn't have the lumber.
Well, the lumber just went for the gates. They could have stacked stones.
That's what most of them are made out of, stone.
What's that?
Were most of them made out of stone?
What's that?
Oh, sorry. Weren't most of them made out of stone?
All the walls were, yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing that wasn't was the gates.
And lack of leadership.
Yeah. The point here is that God does not take people all the time who are skilled in what He wants them to do. He will take people who are unskilled because He wants to show them His glory. And that's what He told Gideon. He said, Gideon, I want you to move over here and look at the enemy. I may never get the book published anyway. But they're up on this hill. They're overlooking the Jezreel Valley. There's 135,000 Midianites, plus all of their families, plus all of their servants, plus all of their animals. The valley is full of enemy. And God said, I want you to go up on the hill. So they're camped on this hill. They're looking at all of these enemies. And Gideon turns around and he's got 33,000 men that answered the call to go to battle. 33,000 against 135,000. And you know what God said? He said, Midian, I can't send you into battle. You got too many men. Read it, it's in there. You got too many men. You're outnumbered 4-1, approximately. But you got too many. He said the reason is because I want the glory. And I don't want you, after the victory, to say, we gained the victory. So what did he do? He pared him down to 300 men. Now you've got 300 men against 135,000, and they won. Who gets the glory?
God.
You have Nehemiah. 800 miles plus from Jerusalem. A servant, a cupbearer, who's graceful, absolutely unqualified to go out and build anything. And God is saying, I'm going to use you to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And you're not only going to just have it easy to go out there and say, build the walls, you're going to have all kinds of opposition. And as we go through this book, we're going to find out they had to be armed. They had to be ready to go to war at any minute because Sanballat and Tobiah and all of them are out there and they're opposing them every step of the way. And who gained the victory? And who gained the glory? And they rebuilt the walls in 52 days, by the way. We'll learn that. All right, so I wanted to point that out because Nehemiah took the time to make the plan. He took the time to answer the call and make the plan and say, this is what we're going to do. And then he went into action and was not afraid, even though it filled him with fear, he was not afraid to ask the king to send him down the road to get the job done. It took something. All right, so after he prayed, he then gave the answer. And this kind of is a throwback to me where I believe it's Paul. It says, don't worry about what you have to say, just open your mouth and God will fill your mouth. He'll tell you what. This is kind of that situation. God help me. And he just starts talking and there it is. This is what we're going to go I'm going to go defend my tombs, my ancestral tombs. I'm going to make sure they stay safe. All right, verse 6. Then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, how long will your journey be? And when will you reach the king to send me? And I set him a time. Furthermore, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to this temple, for the city wall, and for the house that I will occupy. And the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me. All right, so, when you got the opportunity, jump in. So he says to the king, all right, king, here's what I need. Number one, the king didn't give him a yes or no. He first of all said, how long are you going to be gone? In other words, it was an implied yes. How long are you going to be gone? And Nehemiah gave him an answer, and we don't know what that answer was. It is supposed that the answer was probably something like a year, and that Nehemiah extended that leave of absence periodically. He may have also stayed a year and then went back to Shushan and then came back. He may have done this 2 or 3 times. It doesn't tell us that, but that would have been possible. It's just that it's a very long journey when you're traveling 1,000 miles on the back of an animal or walking. But there's also a curious thing here, but it tells us something. It says the queen also was sitting beside the king. So this tells us that this was a private dinner, maybe just a dinner on a Thursday night. Because the queen was never allowed in Persian culture, the Persian court was never allowed at the table when you had guests. She had to stay in her quarters. It was men-only affairs. And this was very, very prevalent in those days. But the queen did share dinner with the king. Also, we find that while kings were very, had many, many wives, Artaxerxes, as far as we know, only had one wife, and that was this, her name was Damaspia. And there's also the speculation that she may have been on Nehemiah's side. In other words, she may have, when he came in and maybe the king wanted to be a little more fierce and she kind of, that kind of thing. We don't know. These are all speculations. Somebody smarter than me is thinking about that. Or somebody hasn't got anything else to think about. I'm not sure which way it is. But we do know it was some kind of a private dinner. Now, either the king had already decided to send Nehemiah, which appears to be the case, or it was dependent on how long he would be gone. But since Nehemiah says, he said, "Oh, and then I told him how long," it's obvious then from that, yeah, the king said you can go, but I need to know how long you're going to be gone. And this could have been just simply from a standpoint of manpower. You're going to be gone, I got to get somebody to fill your spot. How long I got to hire a temp, how long you going to be gone? All right. Now, since Nehemiah did not have the actual conditions of Jerusalem and only heard it secondhand, he had to guess or rely on God for the answer. He may never have seen Jerusalem, or at least can't remember ever seeing Jerusalem in its pre-captivity condition. So how did he even know how big it was? I mean, somebody can say, well, it's 600 feet this way and 1,000 feet that way, but what do you really see? And so when he said, how long you've got to be gone, how does he know how long it's going to take to build a wall? I don't know. But he told him, gave him a time. And it had to be something that God gave him, because it worked. All right. So then Nehemiah takes the next step, and he asks for letters or documents to show to the governors of the Persian territory west of the Euphrates River. Now, there were several reasons for this. First of all, notice it's only west of the Euphrates River. It was a long ways from Shushan to the Euphrates River. Why didn't he need to show any letters between Shushan and the Euphrates River? And that's because it was the territory of Persia. Anything west of the Euphrates River was pretty much captured land, expansion. So it was safe to travel in the area of the Euphrates to Shushan. You didn't have to worry about too much of anything. Nobody was going to bother you, especially if you wore the clothing of a courtier, somebody in the court. But when you crossed the Euphrates River, now it became a different situation, because the governors, or satraps, if you will, that was a Persian name for them, they were the rulers, but they were from the people of that area. So we're going to see a couple of these satraps and what they were like when we look at Sanballat and Tobiah. So you never knew how safe you were with these satraps, because they kind of ran by their own rules. However, if you had a letter that said, I am on a official business from King Artaxerxes, that got their attention. Nobody was going to mess with King Artaxerxes. Even though he may have been considered a weak king, he had a very powerful army. And all he had to do was twitch his little finger, and whatever you were, you aren't now. You're gone. So it was important that he have these letters. And it appears that a letter was written to each of the governors that gave him safe passage to Judea. Notice he had these letters were given to him, and then a letter needed to be written to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, directing him to provide the lumber needed to rebuild the city. And I found this really interesting. I did some research on this. The keeper of the forest, this was not a forest like we think natural forests out here. What the Persians did was they built parks. And the actual word, the actual root word for this means a park or an enclosed garden. So what they would do is they would establish a park, they would plant trees, and this was used just like we use parks today. It was a place mostly for royalty or the ruling class could go and relax in the grass and under the trees. You know, it was that kind of a forest. Well, these forests have been growing for probably almost 70 years now. And there was one that was close to Jerusalem, and it was managed by this man named Asaph. And there was more than enough trees in there to provide the lumber necessary to build the gates of the city and what was needed for the houses and so forth. Now people have said, well, they got them from the trees of Lebanon. There would be no reason to bring trees all the way from Lebanon to fix a gate. Now Solomon had them brought down, or David did, to build the temple, but that was an entirely different situation. that temple had a lot of wood in it, and the trees of Lebanon were the finest. And only the finest went into the temple. But a gate of a city? No. You know, you get an old piece of hardwood and throw it up there. As long as there's holes and nobody can knock it down, that's all you need. So it was not for ornamental reasons. So this was the forest, and he needed these papers because he needed that lumber. Now the word that's used there, by the way, is pardes. Pardes, and that means a park, preserve, or enclosed garden. For the beams of the gates of the city, for the gates, start over again, for the beams, for the gates of the citadel, which pertain to the temple. All right, he needed wood for that. Well, if we look up here, you see this red box right up here, right here. This was the citadel he was talking about. The Romans expanded it, and it was called Fort Antonia. But in Nehemiah's day, it was a garrison, or a place, a fort, if you will, but much smaller, for troops to be stationed. Now, we've been to Jerusalem, and we've seen the Dome of the Rock. You know where the Dome of the Rock sits? Think of the Temple Mount when you look at it from Mount Olives. Where is the Dome of the Rock? At which end of the Temple Mount? This is so, I found this to be so, I'd heard this before, but this was the first time that I've actually seen proof. The Dome of the Rock, here's the temple. The Dome of the Rock is built right there, where Fort Antonia used to be. It is not built over where Solomon's temple was built. How often have you heard the Jews can't rebuild their temple until they tear down the Dome of the Rock? Not true. You remember the other mosque, the El Aqwa Mosque, the Black Mosque. That's sitting where the temple was. However, to make it interesting, if I was going to get an aerial view of this, and I didn't do it. But on the back of the mosque, the El Aqwa Mosque, there's a courtyard like this. And the main mosque is here, and they've got some buildings over here. And right in the middle is this courtyard. Guess what's under the courtyard? The Holy of Holies and the Holy Place. Nothing was ever built on top of it. You don't think God's in control? Now, how do we know this? Well, of course, you probably heard that there have been excavations under the Temple Mount going on for years. We saw some of it, you know, when we were there, we went down under. They have expanded that, and they've followed, the archaeologists have been under there. But also, one of the things they found, and they mapped it out, one of the things that really convinced me was water. We don't think about it, the temple, needing water. When you think about the altar with hundreds and hundreds of animals being killed on that altar, it was a huge thing, and they had all kinds of priests that were butchering animals continually on there. Where'd all the blood go? Down on the floor. So how do you clean that? How do you get rid of all that blood? And you had to do it every day. Well, according to, I think it was Josephus, he said what they did is they had essentially a valve or a way of water. They would open it at night and close the doors and flood the whole area where the altar was. So it was flooded with water, and then they would come in and wash it all out. Well, you don't do that with pitchers of water. You had to have some sort of water. They have traced the water source that came actually from that direction, from Bethlehem, across the Temple Mount, and it didn't cross that way, it crossed this way, right toward the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And in fact, there is a fountain, a spring right outside the Al-Aqsa, Mount, or mosque, which would have been approximately where the altar was, where they sacrificed all the animals. Very, very interesting. And then there were many other things that led to this. But this was the original place where Solomon's temple was. Now I bring that up because we keep hearing, well, they can't build it until we take the mosque down, and nobody's going to let them take the mosque, because it's the third holiest place in Islam, and they go on and on about all of this. What if they didn't have to? What if all they had to do was make an agreement to take this mosque that's basically unused today, to just tear that mosque down and rebuild their temple right where it was originally? Interesting thoughts. Anyway, so first thing he wanted was to rebuild the gates to this citadel that was by the temple. It was what protected the Temple Mount itself from any invasions from the north. Then he needed, of course, a place for the or wood for the city walls. This would have been for the gates, rebuild the gates and the beams, and then for the house that he was going to build. We could kind of look at that and say, oh, he's going to get a new house out of this deal, huh? And that's why he's doing it. Well, he knew he was going to have to live somewhere. And so it makes sense to build a house. You're going to be there for some period of time. He was actually there approximately 12 years before we know of a journey back to Shushan. May have made others before that, but it was at least 12 years. So he needed a place to live, and so building a new house from the rubble and all this there made perfectly good sense. So he was thinking about himself also. And also, I noticed this. He says, he finishes off the 8th verse by saying, and the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Does God ever put a bad hand on anybody? Think about that one. And of course the answer is yes. He does put a bad hand on you. Bad hands aren't something that God's pounding on you. It's when he leads you. David summed it up. He said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's a bad hand. It's taking you through the valley of death. But it's taking you there for a reason, and that reason, of course, is that you get closer to him, and he can then take his rod and staff and lead you and so forth. Takes you into the valley. That would be considered a bad hand. This is considered a good hand because there is no downside to this. He says, yeah, I'll give you the letters, I'll let you get the wood, and man, yeah, no problem at all. In fact, we're going to find also that he even sent some soldiers along with him. All right, verse 9. Then I went to the governors in the region beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. There was nobody going to bother Nehemiah. Now he had a Persian captains, well, there was more than one. He had a bunch of soldiers that went with him. He would have had probably servants, other servants that went with him, scribes, those kinds of things, to record everything that he did. So he had all of this with him. When Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. Okay, so Nehemiah goes, he presents his documents to these men, and he has his armed escort with an undetermined number of soldiers with him. And then when Sanballat and Tobiah read the letters from the king, they're deeply disturbed. What were they disturbed about? It was because somebody was interested in the well-being of the people in Jerusalem. And since Nehemiah had these letters, the assumption had to be the king was interested in the well-being of the people in Jerusalem and Judea, of course. So if the king was interested, we're going to see how these two men treated the people in Jerusalem. You remember Nehemiah's concern was that they were being harassed. You know, they were being, all of this stuff. Who was doing this? Guess who? The main ringleaders were these two guys. They were the ones who were causing the difficulties. And now, here comes an emissary from the king, 800 miles away, or 1,000 journey by the way you walk, away, with soldiers, who's coming to check on these people. Oops. That was their first reaction. So what are they going to do? Oh my goodness. So we look at these two guys. Sanballat was the satrap or governor of Samaria, which, of course, were bitter enemies of the children of Israel. They were mixed breeds. So they had some Jewish blood in them. They were mixed with different groups around Canaan. So, and they were considered absolute dogs by the Jews. They would not touch a Samaritan. You remember Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. There was this guy that got beat up, and the only one that cared for him was a Samaritan. This made this story so unusual because Samaritan would never treat a Jew, and a Jew would never treat a Samaritan with any civility at all. They were bitter enemies. Now it seems that he was born in Horonaim, which is a city in Moab, so he was also a Moabite as well as the governor of Samaria. So he would have been in this mixed pot, if you will, that made up the Samaritans. Now these Samaritans had the same form of worship as the children of Israel, but it was mixed with the pagan religions and gods of Canaan. Tobiah was an Ammonite and high-ranking Ammonite official. The original reads, Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, which would indicate that he rose from the position of slave to being a high-ranking official. Now, the Moabites were in what is today Jordan. So they were on the other side of the Jordan River. So what you had was Sam. He's up here in Samaria, which is the area around the Sea of Galilee, up in that area. Then you have Tobiah, which is on the other side of the Jordan River. And below Samaria, you have the country of Judah. And this is where Jerusalem was. So you had opposition from the north and opposition from the east. All right. Where am I? Oh, okay. Now, this Tobiah is an interesting character because he not only was a Ammonite, but he was also very cunning. We get from the story of Sanballat, who really, was the main character, and Tobiah kind of followed along. In fact, some commentaries say he was probably a servant to Sanballat. Actually, Tobiah was the smart guy. Sanballat was just a big mouth. Tobiah understood, probably years before, what he needed to do. So he arranged a marriage between his son, Johanan, to the daughter of Meshullam, who was the son of Berachan, who was one of the 7 Ephraimite chieftains. Now, the tribe of Ephraim, remember, was one of the chief of Israel. So what he did was have his marry and arranged a marriage between his son and the granddaughter of the chief, one of the high chieftains in the tribe of Ephraim. Well, he wasn't done there. He was also the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Erah, who was one of the priests that returned with Zerubbabel. So now he had contacts, family contacts, in the military side of the people living in Jerusalem, the tribes, and on the priestly side. And he used that to his advantage. Now, I wanted to show you this. By the way, Jerusalem, it's narrowed down, and I don't know that it was this narrow. Some of the maps show it narrow, some of them show it wider. The map I'm going to show you to work on is much wider than this, but it's basically the same idea. The Temple Mount is at the top. So the walls of Jerusalem that Nehemiah is going to build southwest, because it's not sitting actually true north. It's kind of off at an angle. So this whole section from the temple downward is where most of the wall building took place. Remember, we went to the city of David, and it went on actually beyond that. But this guy Tobias, we're going to find later that after the walls were built and everything else, when Nehemiah went back to Shushan, that he convinced the priests to let him build an apartment in the temple, on the temple grounds, in the newly made temple that Zerubbabel had built. He had his own apartment there, his own residence right in the temple. Well, when Zerubbabel came back, when Nehemiah came back, he threw him out, along with all of his stuff. It all got tossed. He went back to the land of the Amorites, which is Jordan today, and he built his own temple. And there is this is a recreation of the Temple Mount with Solomon's temple on it. So this just gives you an idea. Remember I said the temple was at this end? Here's another one that is from another site, says the same thing. So that's what that was. Here we go. Here's a part of, that was just some wall stones. I don't want to go back. This is the temple that Tobiah built. And they haven't had to do very much to get it back to this position. It was found pretty much like this. quite a place. This is a close-up view of it. This is of where he lived as well as his temple. You'll notice around the top, it had carved lions, and they went all the way around the top, as well as on the bottom. Josephus writes about this, and he said there were big, full-size beasts all carved all over this temple. It was made of marble stones. So this was all in marble. You can imagine how it must have looked in this day. Here's some renderings of what they feel it looks like. Splendor. It was, I think they said, 3 floors actually that was in this temple. Here's the front facade. And here's a close-up of one of the lions. It's a female lion, you can see it here. Very detailed. I mean, look at the paws and the head up there. And out its mouth had a drain for the roof. It came out the lion's mouth. I mean, this is incredible stuff. Here's the back facade in the back of the temple. And here's a little close-up of some of the lions that were up around the cornice up on the side. Here's a female lioness, and if you look close, you see the cub right down underneath her. So lions were his favorite thing. Here is a close-up of some lilies. Now the lilies were in the temple in Jerusalem. It was one of the flowers that adorned the temple, because the lily was considered to be the most beautiful flower. And so he brought this idea back to his temple, and so he had to have lilies on his temple. All right, so we find that Tobiah was more than just an accomplice that went along with everything. He was probably one that had a lot to do with what was going on. All right, verse 11. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one on which I rode. And I went out by night through the valley gate to the serpent well and the refuge gate, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem which were broken down, and its gates which were burned with fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal under me to pass. So I went in the night by the valley and viewed the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work. So in the middle of the night, Nehemiah gets up. He takes a few men with him who may have been the soldiers. We don't know. And he took off and he went out the valley gate, which is down at the southern end. Went out the valley gate, across to the refuge or dung gate, which, as we mentioned last week, is where they took all of the animal stuff out and all of that. And they got as far as the fountain gate up here and the water gate, and he couldn't go any further. There was too much refuge, and this was, if you've been to Jerusalem, there's the valley of Kidron is right here of Olives, and this is like this, you know, and you look up and there's the walls that are at the walls of the Temple Mount are right there. This was all on a cliff. So between the refuge, he couldn't get in the gate, so now he had to go out, go down in the valley of Kidron, and view the rest of the wall from down in the valley. Now either he made the full circuit and went back in the valley gate, or he went as far as maybe the chamber of the corner up there and turned around and came in the valley gate. Either way, he had a pretty good view and understanding of the condition of the walls. And from that, then, he knew what had to be done. He didn't tell anybody about it. Everything was kept absolutely secret. All right, so go to verse 11. Then he said to them, "You see the distress that we are in." Who did he say this to? Doesn't tell us. But we're going to find out that these were the priests or the officials in Jerusalem. Then he said to them, "You see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach." And I told them of the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, and also the king's word that he had spoken to me. All right, so sometimes later, maybe the next morning, maybe a week later, we don't know, he went to the leaders and he said, "Look, you see the distress that we're in." Now, if it would have been me, I got up and said, "You dunderheads, you've been sitting here all this time, wallowing around while all these people make fun of you, and you haven't even picked up one rock to stick it on top of another to rebuild the wall." You know, that would have been my approach. You know, what's the matter with you guys? You know, get it right. But look at what he said. He said, "You see how we're in distress." You see it, right? You all agree, we're in distress here. We're a reproach. And look at Jerusalem. It's been wasted. I mean, not only are the walls down, but, you know, half the town has been destroyed and burned, and we have the temple rebuilt now, and some of the houses, but, you know, this is still a mess. Gates are burned with fire. So he reminds them of all of this. Then he says, "Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach." I don't think he stood up and said, "Okay, you all see this. Okay, let's all get together and let's rebuild the walls so we won't be a reproach." I think he was excited. I think he got up there and said, "Hey, come on guys, we need to rebuild the wall. Let's get together and do it." Oh, and by the way, let me just explain something to you. Number one, God called me to do the work. God's good hand, again, has been good unto me. The hand of my God, which has been good upon me. In other words, he called me to do this work. I am doing his, it's his hand that's guiding, okay? Then he turned around and he followed that up by saying, "And also the king's word that he had spoken to me." At this point, the people were probably more interested in the king's word than God's word. But God's word always comes before man's word. If God doesn't bless something, it's never going to happen. So, he gets them excited. Verse 19, "But when Sanballat, the Ammonite, Tobiah, the Ammonite official, and Geshem, the Arab head of it, or Geshem, the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, 'What is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel, king?' So I answered them and said to them, 'The God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore, we his servants will arise and build. But you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem.'" Woo! Then he looked around to make sure those soldiers were still standing there. All right, so now we see this third character, this Geshem, who he was an Arab, probably an Arab chieftain, or head of the Arabs in that particular area, when they heard of the plan, they laughed and scoffed and said, "You'll never do this. Oh, and are you going to go against the king?" Now what they're referring to here is that when the walls of Jerusalem were destroyed under Nebuchadnezzar, they were not supposed to be rebuilt. The gates were never to be rebuilt. And he did that so that there would never be a rebellion against the Babylonian Empire again out of Jerusalem, because that's what the king Zedekiah did. But, you see, this was not Babylon. This was Persia. The Persians had defeated the Babylonians. So the words of the Babylonians no longer carried any weight. King Artaxerxes Longimanus was the king, and if he said rebuild, it was rebuilt. And what these men didn't know, because the papers only said that, evidently he had, only said that he was on official business. They didn't understand that the official business included rebuilding the walls, the citadel, and a house for Nehemiah. So he had the permission of the king. So there did not carry any water. Notice this also. Notice his answer. He didn't tell them, "Go pound sand. You know, just leave us alone." He tells them that later, basically. But this time he doesn't. He didn't argue with them. He didn't say, "Well, you just don't know what I'm here for." Let me tell you what the king said to me personally. He didn't pull any of that. He just looked at him and said, "The God of heaven himself will prosper us." That's all that was necessary. If God said it, it doesn't matter if it's a king, if it's a satrap, or if it's a servant. They will not step in his way, or they'll get run over. So his answer was spot on. God will prosper us. Therefore, his servants, that's us, we're going to arise and build. We're going to do the will of God, whether you like it or you don't like it. And by the way, you have no heritage. You have no tombs here in Jerusalem. You don't have any fathers, any of your ancestors buried in this city. You didn't build the city. You have nothing to do with the city. Not only that, you don't have any rights here. You're Samaritan. You need to go north. You're Amorite. You need to go south. You're an Arab. You need to go down in the deserts of the Sinai. That's where the Arabs were. You don't have any business being in Judah telling us anything. Oh, and by the way, just to sum it up, you don't have any memorial here. In other words, you don't count in this city. What a way to answer, huh? All right. So, let's go into the third chapter. Now, to do the third chapter, I know we're almost out of time, but it's going to go fairly quickly. I just want to show you how the walls were built and make a few comments. So, Nehemiah chapter 3, beginning with verse 1. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priests, and built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They built as far as the Tower of the 100, and consecrated it then as far as the Tower of Hananel. All right? So if we look up here at our map, up at the top, the sheep gate, it was the priests who rebuilt the sheep gate, the wall, the Tower of Mia, and the Tower of Hananel. Now this is significant because these were the priests, number one. Priests didn't normally do these things. Secondly, the sheep gate was the primary way for sacrificial animals to get to the temple. So they started out by building the gate that was needed to bring animals into the city to make atonement for sin. And because of that, when they finished that section, the priest did what? They sanctified and consecrated their work. This was considered the first fruits of the rebuilding. So in the sanctification of this portion, the whole lump or all the work was sanctified. So by this sanctification of the spiritual things, the gate that led to atonement, the whole project became consecrated and sanctified. All right. Then we go on in verse 3. Also the sons of Hassanai built the fish gate. They laid its beams and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. And next to them, Meremoth, the son of Urijah, the son of Koz, made repairs. Next to them, Meshullam, the son of Berachith, the son of Mishabel, made repairs. Next to them, Zadok, the son of Bana, made repairs. Next to them, the Tekoites made repairs. But their nobles did not put their shoulders to the work of their Lord. So we see this bunch here. They came across, they did the fish gate, and then another group came along and went down from the fish gate. And then these Tekoites
Where are you at? Oh, okay, gotcha.
came down the top here.
Okay.
The thing about this that's interesting is their nobles did not get involved. Not only in the work, but in paying for it. And for that, for the rest of their time as tribes, in the tribes, they were looked at with scorn because they failed to work in the rebuilding of the walls that God had called them to do. Tekoites, interesting characters. All right. Moreover, Jehoiada, the son of Paseth, and Mashmalim, the son of Bodash, repaired the old gates. They laid its beams, hung its doors with its bolts and bars. So that's the rest of them here. These guys laid the gate there, which was that little orange thing there. That was the gate. And next to them, Meladiath, the Gibeonite, Jadon, the Marionathite, the men of Gibeon, and Mespah repaired the residence of the governor of the region beyond the river. So that's that blue building. That was evidently a building that had been occupied by one of the governors of the area, and he held his court in there. Now, they probably didn't rebuild the building as much as the wall that was one side of that building had to be rebuilt because they would have been using it at this time. All right. All right, so this old gate is possibly the Damascus gate of today. And the broad wall, which is talked about here, where is that? It's on here someplace. The broad wall was formerly broken down by Joash, king of Israel, in 2 Chronicles 25 and 23. But afterwards rebuilt by Uzziah in 2 Chronicles 26 and 9. And he made it so strong that the Chaldeans found it difficult to demolish and left it standing. So they had that broad wall that was put up down there. And that may have had that out of context because I don't see broad wall mentioned in there. But that's what it was anyway. All right, verse 11. if you could have seen me putting this together, man, it was wild. Makajah, the son of Haram, and Heshbab, the son of repaired another section, as well as the Tower of Ovens. Or ovens, or furniture. There's the broad gate, we just come across it right there, that wide section, that broad wall. They couldn't destroy it, so all they had to do was just make it a little bit stronger, so that nobody could get through it, and it's probably still there today. And they went to the Tower of the Furnaces. Now, nobody knows for sure what the Tower of Furnaces was. In the original, it's ovens, so it was probably a bakery area where ovens for baking were situated, which would make sense. Okay. And next to him was Shallum, the son of Haloish, leader of half the district of Jerusalem. He and his daughters made repairs. That's interesting. They repaired all of that. A man and his daughters. Now, of course, the commentaries were all written, like I said, back in the 1800s, when women were still not considered able to do very much, in the 1800s. So they say, well, they paid the workers to do it. It was their money. I don't know. Maybe they bought workers too. But it says specifically the women made the repairs, and that was one of the biggest sections going through there. All right, then Hanam and the inhabitants of Zanoah repaired the valley gate. They built it, hung its doors with its bolts and bars, and repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the refuge gate. So they went all the way across the bottom. Shallum, the son of Hosah, the leader of the district of Mizpah, repaired the fountain gate. He built it, covered it, hung its doors with its bolts and bars, and repaired the wall of the pool of Shiloh by the garden's gate as far as the stairs that go down from the city of David. So right here. And the stairs here came down out of the city outside the walls. So this was one way you could get into the city, was climbing these stairs. So they repaired all of that. All right. After him, Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, leader of half the district of Beth-zur, made repairs as far as the place in front of the tombs of David to the man-made pool, and as far as the house of the mighty. Now the tombs of David were the burial places of all the kings from David to Hezekiah. They were all buried there. And we've seen David's tomb. You can go in there. We didn't go into it, did we?
There was this, man-made.
Yeah, we saw, the outside, but I don't think we actually went in it, if I remember right. For some reason scheduled or something. But they rebuilt that whole section of wall there. After him, the Levites under Rehum, the son of Bani, made repairs. Next to him, Hashabiah, leader of the half the district of Keilah, made repairs of his district. After him, the brethren under Beviah, the son of Hanadad, leader of the other half of the district of Keilah, made repairs. And next to him, Ezra, the son of Jeshua, the leader of Mizpah, repaired another section in front of the ascent to the armory at the buttress. All right, so where you see the Ophel Tower right there, that building there, you'll notice that the wall is wider right in there. That was a buttress, and it was a fortified section of wall that served different purposes, mainly, of course, defensive purposes, but it also acted to hold the soil up from going down in the valley. There was different reasons for these buttresses. So they rebuilt all of that along there. almost done. After him, Baruch, the son of Jebael, carefully repaired the other section from the buttress to the door of the house of Eliashib, the high priest. All right, so what happens here now is there was another wall that went inward right there. We can't see it because we can't see the topography of this place, but there was in fact a wall that went up this way and went as far as this ridge right here. This is another, what's called the inner wall. So there was an outer wall and an inner wall, and the inner wall, Nehemiah did not rebuild, only the outer wall. But this was considered part of the outer wall right there. So he rebuilt that. After him, and by the way, this goes to this Eliashib, who was the high priest. He had one big house, because some of them went as far as his house, and then the others went as far as the door of his house, which was at the other end of his house. So he had a very large house. The high priest probably had one of the finest houses in all of Jerusalem. And after him the priests, the men of the plain, made repairs. After him Benjamin and Hashub made repairs opposite their house. So these guys are going up the thing here, all the way up. After him, Banui, the son of Henadab, repaired another section of the house of Azariah to the buttress, even as far as the corner. This was considered the corner up here at the top. The wall opposite the buttress and the tower of the king's house were rebuilt. Palal, the son of Uzziah, made repairs opposite the buttress and on the tower which projects from the king's upper house, that was by the court of the prison. After him, Pedaiah, the son of Parosh, made repairs. So, here is this house, or up here, the projecting tower was up at the top. That was probably because it was on higher ground, it was a lookout, and you could see further from up there. And there was a prison there. All right, so they did the opal tower and the projecting tower. Moreover, the Nethinim who dwelt in Ophel made repairs as far as the place in front of the water gate toward the east and on the projecting tower, and then from the Tekoites repaired another section next to the great projecting tower as far as the wall of Ophel. Okay, so what happened here? This Ophel tower here, as you see sticking out, was actually a projecting tower that stuck out, and it was used to protect this whole area. You see the Gihon Spring and the water gate. There was another tower that projected out right there that was just included. Between the two of them, they protected the only water source for Jerusalem, for the city proper, which was this gate. So they would go out the gate to the Gihon Spring and get their water. Okay. Beyond the horse gate, the priests made repairs, each in front of his own house, which is right there, the horse gate. The priests repaired all of that. The horse gate is where the horses entered to get into the palace and the royal stables. Okay, so that's what that is. That horse gate actually is where the horses went in and out. If you'll remember back on one of the slides, didn't point it out, but they had actually bridges that crossed the valley. And these were roads that came to the gates. And so one of those is at the horse gate. The horses would go out across the bridge, and then they could either go down to the brook Kidron for water, or they could intersect with one of the roads and head out wherever they were going. All right. After him, Hananiah, the son of Shemaiah, the Hunan, The sixth son of Zelaph repaired another section after him. Mishmael, the son of Berechiah, made repairs in front of his dwelling. After him, Melechizedek, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs as far as the house of Nehemiah and of the merchants in front of the Nekphah gate, and as far as the upper room in the corner, between the upper room and the gate, and so forth. In other words, they finished it.
They all had a hand in it.
Yeah, I was getting tired. I know you guys were. All right, why did I go through all this? A couple of things I want you to notice. First of all, it wasn't done in this order. It was just given to us. It was all built at the same time. After the priests did their portion, everybody else went to work. So these walls were going up. You'll notice the Ticklerites were at a couple of three different sections. So as they finished their work on one side, they'd go to another and go back to work to build another section. But what I wanted to point out here, if you notice carefully, there were goldsmiths that were building walls. There were priests that were building walls, including the high priest is also mentioned as building. There were silversmiths. There were men who were from different areas outside of the city that came in to build the walls. It wasn't just a few people. Everybody pitched in, with the exception,
The nobles.
yeah, those Tickerite rulers, who to this day are looked down on as scum because they did not lend their shoulder to building. And I think there's a story in that for us. God has something for everybody to do. It may not be where your skill set is. It may not be what you think you should be doing. Me, I should not be running a food ministry. No way. Not me. No. I should be president of some seminary someplace or something. Or pastoring a church of 5,000. I don't know, doing something other than food ministry. But you know what? That's what needs to be done, and that's what he's told me to do. So that's what I'm doing. The point here is don't look for the big things. Don't even look for where your skill set is. Look for what God wants you to do right now. Not tomorrow. I do not hold to this idea that God has a destiny for us here. God does not have a destiny for any of us, except on the other side. It's our purpose, and our purpose is only for today. Purpose may completely change tomorrow. Tomorrow, I might get a call and go be the pastor of a big church. I doubt it, but you know, it could happen. And then I can tell them no. No, you see, tomorrow my purpose may be different, and that's really what I want to emphasize, and I think that's why Nehemiah went to so much, or at least God had him be so specific about who built what. I don't really care who built what section of the wall. It doesn't matter to me. The walls got rebuilt in 52 days. What does matter to me is who built them. What were their skill sets? What was their mindset? It was doing the will of God. And so with that, we're going to close. I'm a little bit over, but I was a little late, so we'll get started. So I guess we're okay. All right, we'll see you all next week.